The autumn rain pelted against the windows like tiny fists demanding entry, matching the nervous rhythm of my heart. I smoothed down my simple black dress for the 100th time, the worn fabric a reminder of everything I couldn't afford to replace. The waiting room of Blackwood Manor smelled of lemon polish and old money, both equally intimidating to someone like me. "Ms. Ellis?" The stiff-backed woman who had introduced herself as Mrs. Reynolds peered at me over half-moon glasses. "Mr. Salvatore does not tolerate tardiness. You're fortunate he's agreed to see you at all." I swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am. I appreciate the opportunity." Opportunity was putting it kindly. Desperation had brought me here. 3 months behind on rent, no health insurance for my medications. And now this. My last chance at employment after being blacklisted from every reputable agency in the city, thanks to my former employer's vindictive lies. The irony wasn't lost on me that my salvation might come from working for the most dangerous man in the state. Antonio Salvatore. Even thinking his name sent a chill down my spine. The heavy double doors swung open, and Mrs. Reynolds gestured for me to follow. My sensible shoes squeaked against the marble floor, announcing my poverty with every step. The office we entered was cavernous, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens now drenched in rain. A massive desk anchored the room, and behind it sat a man whose presence seemed to consume all the oxygen. "Sir, this is Charlotte Ellis, the applicant for the position." I'd seen photos of Antonio Salvatore in newspapers, but nothing prepared me for the reality. Newspaper images couldn't capture the coiled energy of the man, the way his broad shoulders strained against his impeccably tailored charcoal suit, or how his olive-toned hands rested with deceptive casualness on the polished desk. A signet ring glinted on his right hand. Gold and onyx, I thought, though I dared not stare. What struck me most were his eyes. Dark as midnight, they assessed me with the cold calculation of a predator deciding whether I was prey worth pursuing. "Sit," he said, his voice unexpectedly soft yet commanding. I sank into the leather chair across from him, keeping my spine straight despite the urge to curl into myself. "Your references are problematic." He tapped a folder I presumed contained my pitiful resume. "Care to explain why Mrs. Harrington claims you stole from her?" My cheeks burned. "I never stole anything, sir. Mrs. Harrington's son made advances. When I refused him, he took revenge by claiming I'd taken his mother's jewelry." Something flickered in Salvatore's eyes. Interest, perhaps, or merely the reflection of lightning from the storm outside. "And you expect me to believe your word over that of the Harringtons?" His Italian accent became more pronounced with each word, rolling his R's in a way that sent another involuntary shiver through me. "No, sir. I expect nothing." I met his gaze directly, surprising myself with my courage. "But it's the truth all the same." A man appeared silently at Salvatore's shoulder, muscular, with a telltale bulge beneath his jacket that could only be a gun. He whispered something into his boss's ear. Salvatore nodded once, and the man disappeared as quietly as he'd arrived. "I have a daughter," Salvatore said abruptly. "She's 8 years old. Her name is Sophia." I nodded, unsure where this was heading. "Sophia is special. She has autism. She does not speak to strangers. She does not like to be touched. She has driven away 7 housekeepers in the past year." He leaned forward, those dark eyes boring into mine. "Why should I believe you would be different?" I took a deep breath. "My younger brother has autism, sir. I helped raise him until he was 16 when our parents died. He lives in a group home now because I can't afford to care for him properly." My voice cracked despite my best efforts. "I understand the challenges, and I know that every person with autism is different. But I've learned patience and how to create a structured environment. I know how to respect boundaries and recognize patterns." Something changed in his posture, an almost imperceptible relaxation. "Show me your hands." The request was so unexpected that I complied without thinking, extending my hands palm up across the desk. His fingers brushed mine as he turned my hands over, examining them. His touch was warm, unexpectedly gentle, sending an electric current up my arms. "No rings, no long nails, no polish," he noted. "Sophia dislikes these things. They distract her." He released me, and I quickly withdrew, tucking my hands beneath the desk to hide their trembling. You're younger than I expected. I'm 26, sir. And no family obligations? No boyfriend who will complain when you stay late? I shook my head. Just my brother. And as I mentioned, yes, the group home. He studied me, and I had the distinct impression he was seeing far more than I wanted to reveal. My daughter requires consistency, Ms. Ellis. If I hire you, you will live here. Your days off will be scheduled according to Sophia's needs, not yours. You will follow her routine exactly as my staff directs. Any deviation could trigger episodes that are difficult for her. I understand. Do you? His lips curved in what might have been a smile on a different man, but on him looked predatory. I doubt that very much. A knock at the door interrupted us. The same guard appeared, but this time he wasn't alone. He held the hand of a small girl with cascading dark curls. Her eyes, so like her father's, focused intently on the floor. She wore a pristine white dress with matching tights, but one shoe was missing. She rocked slightly on her feet, a self-soothing motion I recognized immediately. Sir, I apologize, but Miss Sophia insisted on seeing you. She's become agitated. Salvatore's entire demeanor transformed in an instant. The hardness melted away as he rose and moved toward his daughter. It's all right, Marco. Thank you. He crouched before the girl, careful not to touch her. Sophia, tesoro mio, what's wrong? The child didn't respond verbally, but her free hand fluttered in a pattern I recognized as distress. Without thinking, I slipped from my chair and knelt on the floor, keeping a respectful distance. I noticed a small tear in the girl's tights, just below the knee. Her tights are torn, I said softly, and she's missing a shoe. Salvatore's head snapped toward me, surprise evident in his expression. That might be upsetting her, I continued. The asymmetry and the unexpected sensation. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small sewing kit, a habit from caring for my brother, who couldn't tolerate tears in his clothing. May I? After a moment's hesitation, Salvatore nodded. I moved slowly, telegraphing my movements. Hello, Sophia. I'm Charlotte. I see your tights have a small tear. That must feel strange and uncomfortable. Would it be okay if I fix them for you? I won't touch your skin, just the fabric. The girl didn't look at me, but she stopped rocking. I took that as permission, and with swift, practiced movements, made a nearly invisible repair to the tights. There, all better. Now shall we find your other shoe? Sometimes things hide from us, don't they? My brother's shoes used to play hide and seek all the time. For the first time, Sophia's eyes flickered toward me, though not quite meeting my gaze. Her hand stopped its agitated fluttering. Marco, Salvatore said quietly. Check her bedroom and the hallway for the missing shoe. Sir, we've already... Check again. While Marco disappeared, I remained kneeling, not speaking, but humming very softly, a technique that had often calmed my brother during moments of stress. Salvatore watched me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. I pretended not to notice, keeping my focus on Sophia. The blue butterfly is back, the little girl suddenly whispered, so quietly I almost missed it. Salvatore tensed beside her, his eyes widening fractionally. Is it a special butterfly? I asked gently. It only comes when it's safe. Her eyes remained fixed on a point just past my shoulder. Marco returned, holding a small white shoe. Found it under her desk, sir. I didn't reach for the shoe. Instead, I said, Sophia, would you like to put your shoe on, or would you prefer if your father helps you? Papa, she said, still not looking at anyone. Salvatore took the shoe from Marco and carefully helped his daughter slip it on. Never actually touching her skin, I noted, just supporting the shoe as she pushed her foot into it. Better? He asked her. She nodded, then turned and walked out of the room without another word. Marco following close behind. When the door closed, Salvatore remained crouched for a moment, his expression unreadable. When he rose and returned to his desk, the hardness had returned to his features. She spoke to you, he said, his tone making it sound like an accusation. Children with autism often surprise us, I replied carefully. Sophia hasn't spoken a word to any of her previous caregivers. Some of them worked for months without hearing her voice. He tapped his fingers against the desk. 1, 2, 3, pause, repeat. The blue butterfly is her indicator, her way of telling me she feels safe with someone. I remained silent, sensing the weight of this revelation. You'll start immediately. Mrs. Reynolds will show you to your quarters and explain Sophia's schedule. He pressed a button on his desk, and the stiff-backed woman appeared so quickly she must have been waiting just outside. Sir, she said, Ms. Ellis will be taking the position. Get her settled in the east wing, near Sophia's rooms. Of course, sir. As I rose to follow Mrs. Reynolds, Salvatore's voice stopped me. Ms. Ellis. I turned back. If you ever betray my daughter's trust, or mine, there won't be a place on this earth where you can hide from me. His voice was soft, almost gentle, which somehow made the threat more terrifying. Do we understand each other? Perfectly, Mr. Salvatore, as I followed Mrs. Reynolds through the maze of hallways. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just made a deal with the devil himself. What I didn't know then was how completely that deal would transform both our lives, or how thin the line between protection and possession truly was. That night, as I unpacked my meager belongings in a room larger than my entire former apartment, I caught a glimpse of myself in the ornate mirror. My brown hair was coming loose from its practical bun, and my eyes looked too large for my face, bright with an emotion I couldn't name. Fear, yes, but something else too. A dangerous flicker of hope. A knock on my door made me jump. Mrs. Reynolds stood there with a stack of neatly folded clothing. Your uniforms, she said crisply. Mr. Salvatore requires all staff to dress appropriately. You'll find everything you need. She laid them on the bed, simple but clearly expensive dresses in navy and charcoal. Sophia's schedule, she continued, handing me a typed sheet. Memorize it. Any deviation causes her significant distress. I scanned the meticulous hour-by-hour breakdown of the child's day. One more thing, Mrs. Reynolds added, her voice dropping slightly. Mr. Salvatore is very protective of his daughter. The last housekeeper who upset Sophia, well, she disappeared rather suddenly. With that parting warning, she left me alone with my thoughts, and the rain still beating against windows that suddenly felt like the bars of a gilded cage. The first week at Blackwood Manor passed in a blur of routines and unspoken rules. Sophia's schedule was a sacred text, followed with religious precision. Breakfast at 7:15 a.m. Never 7:14, never 7:16. Strawberry yogurt on Mondays and Wednesdays. Oatmeal with exactly 6 blueberries on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and cinnamon toast cut into perfect triangles on Fridays. Weekends were for pancakes, shaped like butterflies, with the syrup in a separate dish, never touching the pancakes until Sophia was ready. I learned quickly that Sophia's world operated on patterns invisible to most, but devastating when disrupted. My own schedule revolved entirely around hers. Awake by 6 a.m. to prepare her day, asleep long after she'd gone to bed at precisely 8:30 p.m., once I'd laid out her clothing for tomorrow and checked her room for any changes that might upset her. What surprised me most was how rarely I saw Antonio Salvatore. He was a ghost in his own home, appearing without warning and vanishing just as suddenly. When he did materialize, everyone's demeanor changed, backs straightened, voices lowered, eyes averted. Even Mrs. Reynolds, with her perpetual disapproval, softened in his presence, her clipped tones turning almost deferential. I caught glimpses of him in the hallways, always surrounded by men in dark suits with watchful eyes. Sometimes I'd spot him in Sophia's doorway late at night, just watching her sleep, his expression unreadable in the shadows. He never acknowledged me during these moments, but I felt his gaze following me long after he'd disappeared. On the 8th day, as I was helping Sophia with her morning routine, she suddenly said, "Papa has meetings on Tuesdays." I nearly dropped the hairbrush. These were the first words she'd spoken to me since that initial encounter in her father's office. Does he? I kept my tone casual, continuing to brush her dark curls with exactly 20 strokes per section. No more, no less. Bad men come on Tuesdays. In the basement, she lined up her colored pencils with mathematical precision, arranging them in rainbow order. They're afraid of him. I swallowed hard. Many people find new situations frightening, I said carefully. Not you. She finally looked at me, her dark eyes so like her father's that it made my breath catch. You're not afraid of Papa. Before I could formulate a response to this startling observation, Mrs. Reynolds appeared at the doorway. "Ms. Ellis, Mr. Salvatore wishes to speak with you in his study." Immediately. My stomach clenched. Had I violated some unwritten rule? Disrupted some crucial pattern? "I'll be right back, Sophia," I promised, setting down the hairbrush exactly where she preferred it. The little girl didn't acknowledge my departure, already absorbed in her meticulous drawing. I followed Mrs. Reynolds through the labyrinthine hallways, my mind racing through every interaction of the past week, searching for mistakes. We stopped before those same imposing double doors I'd first entered over a week ago. "Enter," came Salvatore's voice before Mrs. Reynolds could even knock. She opened the door for me but didn't follow me in. The heavy wood closed behind me with the finality of a tomb. Antonio Salvatore stood with his back to me, gazing out at the garden where autumn was painting the trees in fiery colors. His suit today was deep blue, almost black, tailored to emphasize the breadth of his shoulders. A glass of amber liquid rested in his hand. "You've made quite an impression on my daughter, Ms. Ellis." I clasped my hands to stop them from trembling. "I hope a positive one, sir." He turned then, and I was struck again by the intensity of his gaze. There was something different about him today. A tension in the set of his jaw, a tightness around his eyes. Sophia showed me this. He picked up a piece of paper from his desk and held it out to me. I stepped forward to take it, careful not to let our fingers brush. It was one of Sophia's drawings, a blue butterfly hovering beside a figure with brown hair pulled back in a bun. Me, unmistakably. "She's very talented," I said softly. "She's never drawn anyone outside our family before." He moved toward me, and I caught a whiff of his cologne, something expensive and subtle with notes of cedar and spice. "Tell me, Ms. Ellis, what exactly are your intentions here?" The question caught me off guard. "I don't understand." "Don't you?" He circled me slowly, like a predator assessing its prey. A young woman with a problematic past suddenly becomes indispensable to the daughter of a man like me. Some might see opportunity in such a situation. Heat flooded my face. "I would never use a child that way," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice, especially not one as special as Sophia. He stopped directly in front of me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. "Then why are you here, Charlotte Ellis? A woman educated at Princeton doesn't typically seek employment as a housekeeper." My blood ran cold. My education wasn't on my resume. I deliberately omitted it, knowing it would raise questions I preferred not to answer. "You've been investigating me." A slight curl of his lips, not quite a smile. "I investigate everyone who comes near my daughter." "Then you know why I'm here." I lifted my chin. "My brother's care is expensive. My student loans are crushing. And thanks to the Harringtons, my degree is worthless in any field that requires a background check. So it's purely financial?" He took a sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving mine. "No," I admitted. "I genuinely care about Sophia. She reminds me of Jason, my brother, at that age. Brilliant, perceptive, trapped in a world that doesn't understand how she experiences it." Something shifted in his expression. A softening so subtle I might have imagined it. "You speak of her autism as if it were a gift, rather than an affliction." "Isn't it both?" I countered. "Like many gifts, it comes with a price, but that doesn't diminish its value." He studied me for a long moment, then abruptly changed course. "Tomorrow is Sophia's piano lesson. It's typically challenging. I noticed it on her schedule. Is there something specific I should know?" "Her teacher, Ms. Abernathy, doesn't fully appreciate Sophia's needs. She insists on techniques that Sophia finds distressing." His jaw tightened. "Unfortunately, she's the only qualified teacher willing to come to the house, given my reputation." I understood the unspoken request. "I'll be there for the entire lesson. If Ms. Abernathy's methods become too overwhelming for Sophia, I'll intervene." He nodded once. "Good." Then, without warning, "Have dinner with me tonight." It wasn't a question. "Sir?" "Sophia goes to bed at 8:30. Join me for dinner at 9. There are matters regarding my daughter's care we need to discuss." Before I could respond, a sharp knock came at the door. Marco entered, his face grim. "Sir, there's a situation that requires your immediate attention." Salvatore's expression hardened instantly. "We'll continue this conversation at dinner, Ms. Ellis. 9 o'clock. I recognized the dismissal and turned to leave, but his voice stopped me at the door. "Wear the blue dress in your closet." I glanced back, startled. "It matches your eyes," he added, almost as an afterthought. The door closed behind me, leaving me breathless and confused in the hallway. How did he know the contents of my closet? And more disturbingly, why had my heart accelerated at the command in his voice? The piano lesson the next day was every bit the disaster Salvatore had suggested. Ms. Abernathy, a pinch-faced woman with bony hands and impatience radiating from every pore, clearly viewed Sophia's autism as an inconvenience rather than a neurological difference. "No, no, no." She slapped the piano bench beside Sophia, causing the girl to flinch. "You must curve your fingers properly." Sophia's hands began to flutter in that now familiar pattern of distress. I stepped forward from my position near the window. "Perhaps Sophia could try a different approach," I suggested. "Sometimes alternative techniques—" "I've been teaching piano for 30 years, young woman." Ms. Abernathy cut me off with a glare. "I hardly need advice from a housekeeper." I bit back a sharp retort. "Of course. I simply noticed that Sophia seems uncomfortable with— discomfort is part of learning." She turned back to Sophia, whose rocking had intensified. "Now, again from the beginning." When Ms. Abernathy reached to reposition Sophia's hands, the little girl let out a heart-wrenching whimper. Something protective and fierce ignited in my chest. "That's enough for today," I said firmly, moving between them. "I beg your pardon. Mr. Salvatore pays for a full hour, and we've barely begun." "Mr. Salvatore pays for Sophia to learn piano, not to be traumatized by it." I kept my voice level but unyielding. "The lesson is over." Ms. Abernathy's face flushed an ugly red. "I will be speaking to Mr. Salvatore about this insolence. I'm counting on it." I turned my back on her and crouched beside Sophia, whose eyes were squeezed shut. "It's all right now, Sophia. The music is taking a break. Would you like to go to your quiet room?" She nodded, almost imperceptibly. I heard Ms. Abernathy gathering her things with aggressive movements, but I kept my attention focused entirely on Sophia. "I never!" the piano teacher huffed as she stormed out. Once she was gone, Sophia's eyes opened. She looked directly at me, a rare occurrence that made my heart swell. "The butterfly stays," she whispered. I smiled gently. "Yes, the butterfly stays." The blue dress hung in my closet like a question. I'd never seen it before today, yet there it was. Silk the color of a summer sky, simple yet elegant. It had appeared while I was helping Sophia with her afternoon routine, along with a note in masculine handwriting. "I look forward to our dinner. A.S." I stared at myself in the mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back. The dress fit perfectly, suspiciously so, as if it had been made for me. My brown hair, freed from its practical bun, fell in soft waves past my shoulders. I wore no jewelry. I owned none, but somehow the absence made the look more striking. At precisely 9 o'clock, a knock came at my door. I expected Mrs. Reynolds, but instead found Marco waiting in the hallway. "Mr. Salvatore is ready for you, Ms. Ellis." He led me not to the formal dining room where the staff took their meals, but to a smaller, more intimate setting I hadn't seen before. A solarium, glass-walled and filled with exotic plants, overlooked the moonlit gardens. A single table was set for two, candlelight casting golden shadows, and there stood Antonio Salvatore, without his usual entourage of watchful guards. He wore a black shirt open at the collar, no tie, with the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms, less formal than I'd ever seen him, yet no less intimidating. His eyes traveled slowly from my face to the hem of the dress and back again, his expression unreadable. "You look beautiful, Charlotte." My first name in his mouth sounded like a different word entirely, rich with meaning I couldn't, or wouldn't, decipher. "Thank you for the dress," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "though I'm curious how you knew my size." A ghost of a smile. "I know everything about the people in my home." Marco pulled out my chair, and I sat, hyper-aware of Salvatore's presence across from me. A waiter appeared from nowhere, pouring wine into crystal glasses. "Ms. Abernathy called me today, he said once we were alone, quite distraught. I tensed. I'm sorry if I overstepped. Don't apologize. He cut me off with a wave of his hand. I've terminated her services. I blinked in surprise. You fired her? No one upsets my daughter. His tone left no room for discussion. Besides, you were right. Sophia should learn in a way that accommodates her uniqueness, not despite it. The dinner conversation flowed more easily than I expected. Antonio, he'd insisted I use his first name, at least in private, possessed a surprising knowledge of autism spectrum disorders. He spoke of therapies he'd researched, specialists he'd consulted, and his frustration with a world that refused to adapt to his daughter's needs. I can build empires and break men with a phone call, he said, swirling the ruby wine in his glass, but I cannot make the world kinder to my Sophia. In those moments, the dangerous Mafia boss receded, revealing a father desperate to protect his child. It was disarmingly human, this vulnerability he showed only when speaking of Sophia, what happened to her mother. The question slipped out before I could stop it, wine and candlelight loosening my tongue. His face shuddered instantly. That is not a subject we discuss. I apologize, I said quickly. I shouldn't have. No, you shouldn't have. His voice had lost its warmth. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again, Charlotte. The sudden chill between us remained through the rest of the meal, though he maintained impeccable courtesy. When we finished, he escorted me back to my room in silence, stopping outside my door. You did well today with Sophia, he said finally. I won't forget it. Before I could respond, he took my hand and brought it to his lips, pressing a kiss against my knuckles. The gesture was old-world, formal, yet the heat of his mouth against my skin sent electricity racing up my arm. Good night, Charlotte. He was gone before I could catch my breath, leaving me standing outside my door with my heart hammering against my ribs and the ghost of his touch lingering on my skin. Weeks passed, falling into patterns as structured as Sophia's daily schedule. I grew to love the little girl with her brilliant mind and unique view of the world. We developed our own language of gestures and half-spoken thoughts. She began to seek me out, showing me her drawings, her collections of feathers and smooth stones, the treasures of her orderly universe. Antonio remained an enigma, appearing and disappearing like a storm front. Sometimes days would pass when I'd see him only from a distance, surrounded by his men, his face hard as granite. Other times, he would materialize in Sophia's room while I read her bedtime stories, listening from the shadows with an expression I couldn't decipher. Occasionally, he would invite me to dine with him after Sophia was asleep, and we would talk late into the night about his daughter, about books, about everything except who he really was and what happened behind those basement doors on Tuesdays. I began to dread Tuesdays, not for myself, but for the darkness they brought to Antonio's eyes. He was always different afterward, colder, more distant, as if he needed to rebuild the walls between the man who cared for his daughter and the man who made other men afraid. You shouldn't look at me that way, he told me one evening as we sat in his study, the fire casting shadows across his sharp features. What way? I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. Like you're trying to reconcile two different men. His eyes, nearly black in the firelight, fixed on mine. There are not two Antonios, Charlotte. There is only one. Remember that. Yet I couldn't help but see the contradictions. The tenderness with which he spoke of Sophia contrasted with the cold efficiency I glimpsed when he dealt with his business associates. Or the gentle way he never touched his daughter without permission, versus the casual displays of dominance he exhibited with everyone else, including me. A hand at the small of my back, guiding me through doorways, fingers brushing my arm to emphasize a point, those dark eyes tracking my movements when he thought I wouldn't notice. I told myself I was imagining the latter, that the tension I felt when he was near was simply fear, not something more dangerous, more forbidden. I was his daughter's caretaker, nothing more. The beautiful dresses that continued to appear in my closet, the books he left on my nightstand that I'd mentioned wanting to read, the way he'd begun to include me in family dinners with Sophia. These were merely the actions of a grateful father, not a man with other intentions. At least, that's what I desperately needed to believe. The morning everything changed dawned cold and clear, frost etching delicate patterns on the windows. I was helping Sophia with her math exercises, far beyond typical third-grade level, when Mrs. Reynolds appeared at the door, her perpetual composure visibly shaken. "Ms. Ellis, you're needed downstairs, immediately." Something in her tone made my stomach clench. "What's wrong?" "It's not my place to say." Her eyes darted to Sophia, then back to me. "Marco will stay with Miss Sophia." I squeezed Sophia's shoulder gently. "I'll be back soon." "Keep working on these problems, and we'll check them together, okay?" She nodded without looking up, already absorbed in her calculations. Mrs. Reynolds led me not to Antonio's study, but to a smaller room near the front entrance. When she opened the door, I froze in shock. 2 police officers stood inside. Between them was a face I'd hoped never to see again. James Harrington, the son of my former employer, the man whose lies had destroyed my career. "Charlotte Ellis?" one of the officers asked. I nodded mutely. "These gentlemen are here about the theft charges Mr. Harrington has filed against you," Mrs. Reynolds explained, her voice brittle. James smirked, his handsome face as punchable as I remembered. "Hello, Charlotte. Imagine my surprise when I heard you'd found employment with the esteemed Mr. Salvatore." "There must be some mistake," I said, finding my voice at last. "Those accusations were proven false. The charges were dropped." "New evidence has come to light," the older officer said, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Harrington's mother discovered additional missing items, and security footage has surfaced that places you at the scene." My blood ran cold. "That's impossible. I never took anything." "Then you won't mind coming down to the station to clear this up." The younger officer stepped forward, handcuffs glinting ominously in his hand. "This is absurd," I protested, panic rising in my throat. "I can't leave. I'm responsible for Mr. Salvatore's daughter. She needs consistency, routine." "Should have thought about that before you decided to steal," James said with mock sympathy. Just then, the door opened. Antonio Salvatore stood in the threshold, his presence immediately dominating the room. He wore a charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the light, his expression controlled, but eyes blazing with cold fury. "What is happening here?" His voice was soft, dangerously so. The officers straightened instinctively. Even they weren't immune to the authority he radiated. "Mr. Salvatore," the older one began, "we have a warrant for Ms. Ellis's arrest regarding theft charges from her previous employer." Antonio's gaze shifted to James Harrington, who had the good sense to look uncomfortable under that penetrating stare. "Mr. Harrington," Antonio said, his Italian accent more pronounced than usual. "What an unexpected pleasure." "Mr. Salvatore," James cleared his throat. "This is just a legal matter that—" "A legal matter," Antonio repeated, the words like ice. "In my home, involving my daughter's caretaker, without my knowledge." He crossed to his desk and pressed a button. Within seconds, Marco appeared, along with 2 other security men I recognized from Antonio's entourage. "Gentlemen," Antonio said to the officers, "I understand you have a job to do. However, Ms. Ellis is essential to my daughter's care. Removing her without warning would cause my child significant distress." "Sir, we have a warrant," the younger officer began. "Of course." Antonio cut him off smoothly. "And you will execute it, after my attorney arrives to review it. In the meantime, perhaps we can discuss this situation like civilized men." He turned to James. "Mr. Harrington, I believe your father and I have mutual associates. Giorgio Vannucci, for instance." The color drained from James's face. I didn't know who Giorgio Vannucci was, but clearly, the name held significance. Yes, I believe they've done business," James stammered. "How fortunate. I'm sure a single phone call could clear up this unfortunate misunderstanding." Antonio smiled, a gesture that never reached his eyes. "Marco, please escort our guests to the West Parlor. Offer them refreshments while we wait for my attorney." Marco stepped forward, his posture making it clear this wasn't a suggestion. "Mrs. Reynolds, Take Ms. Ellis back to Sophia. She doesn't need to concern herself with this matter any further. But sir, I protested. Antonio silenced me with a look. It's handled, Charlotte. Go to my daughter. I hesitated, torn between relief and concern about what handled might entail. Now please, he added, his tone gentler, but no less commanding. As I left, I caught James Harrington's expression, a man realizing too late that he had made a grave miscalculation. That evening, after Sophia was asleep, a knock came at my door. I opened it to find Antonio standing there, his tie loosened, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand. May I come in? I stepped back to allow him entry, acutely aware that we'd never been alone in my room before. He moved to the window, looking out at the moonlit grounds. The charges have been dropped, he said without preamble. Permanently this time, Mr. Harrington has signed a statement admitting the accusations were fabricated out of personal vendetta. Relief flooded through me. Thank you. But I have to ask, what did you do to make him confess? Antonio turned, his expression unreadable in the half-light. Does it matter? Yes, I said firmly. It matters to me. He studied me for a long moment. I simply made it clear that continuing his vendetta against you would be more costly than he was prepared to pay. You threatened him. I reminded him of reality. Antonio took a sip of his whiskey. Men like James Harrington only understand power and consequences. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the room's warmth. And men like you understand how to wield both. Something flickered in his eyes, anger, perhaps, or disappointment. Yes, men like me. He set down his glass and moved toward me, stopping close enough that I could smell his cologne, feel the heat radiating from his body. Does that frighten you, Charlotte? Should it? I didn't back away, though every instinct screamed for me to create distance between us. Yes. His voice dropped lower. You should be terrified. Of you. Of this. Before I could process his meaning, his hand cupped my cheek, his touch startlingly gentle for a man with so much power, so much darkness. Of what I want from you. My breath caught. What do you want from me? His thumb traced my lower lip, sending shivers down my spine. Everything. The single word hung between us, heavy with implication. I knew I should step back, establish boundaries, remember who he was, and all the reasons why this was impossible. Instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, my body betraying my better judgment. Sophia, I began, searching for an anchor in the storm of emotions threatening to drown me. Adores you, he finished. As do I, though in very different ways. His confession, spoken so matter-of-factly, stunned me into silence. Say something, Charlotte. A vulnerability I'd never heard before colored his voice. This is dangerous, I whispered. Not sure if I meant for him, for me, or for Sophia. Everything valuable is dangerous. His other hand found my waist, drawing me closer. The question is whether the reward outweighs the risk. I placed my palm against his chest, feeling his heart beating steadily beneath expensive fabric and the solid muscle beneath. I meant to push him away, to be sensible, to remember all the reasons why this was a terrible idea. Instead, I curled my fingers into his shirt and pulled him closer. His mouth claimed mine with restrained hunger, as if he'd been holding himself back for too long. One hand tangled in my hair, the other at the small of my back, pressing me against him. I melted into the kiss, all my carefully constructed reasons disintegrating like paper in flame. When we broke apart, both breathless, his eyes searched mine. Tell me to stop, and I will. One word, Charlotte, and I'll walk out that door. The choice he offered, genuine, despite the desire evident in his darkened eyes, gave me courage. This man, who commanded empires with an iron fist, was giving me power over him, however momentarily. Stay, I whispered. His smile transformed his face, softening the hard lines, revealing the man beneath the carefully controlled exterior. For a heartbeat, I glimpsed Antonio separate from Salvatore, the father, not the feared Mafia boss, but as he lowered his mouth to mine again, I knew the truth he'd warned me about. There weren't two different men, there was only one, and I was choosing all of him, darkness included. Dawn found us tangled in my sheets, his arm heavy across my waist, my head nestled against his chest where I could hear the steady rhythm of his heart. In sleep, the dangerous edge that always surrounded him had softened, making him look almost peaceful. I traced the lines of a scar that ran along his collarbone, wondering about the story behind it, but knowing better than to ask. His body told tales of violence, scars both old and new, mapping a history I could only imagine. His eyes opened, instantly alert in the way of men accustomed to danger. When he saw me watching him, a slow smile spread across his face. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning." I couldn't help but smile back, despite the uncertainty churning beneath my surface contentment. "We should talk about—" He pressed a finger to my lips. "Later. Right now, I just want to look at you in the morning light." His gaze traveled over me with such intensity that I felt my skin flush. Then his expression changed, becoming more serious. "Sophia will be awake soon," he said, glancing at the clock beside my bed. We shouldn't disrupt her routine. The mention of his daughter brought reality crashing back. What had I done? Complicated an already delicate situation, potentially jeopardizing Sophia's stability and my position in her life. Antonio read my expression with unnerving accuracy. "Second thoughts already?" "Not second thoughts," I said carefully. "Just considerations. Sophia needs consistency, stability. Whatever this is between us, it can't interfere with her care." He nodded, expression somber. "Agreed. Which is why discretion is essential, at least for now." "And what is this, exactly?" I asked, needing definition, parameters, something solid to stand on. Antonio sat up, the sheet pooling around his waist, revealing the muscular torso marked with the evidence of a violent life. He took my hand, his touch unexpectedly tender. "This is me, wanting you. Not just in my bed, but in my life, with Sophia, with me." His eyes held mine, unwavering. "I don't make such decisions lightly, Charlotte." "Nor do I," I replied softly. "But your life is complicated." A harsh laugh escaped him. "That's a diplomatic way of putting it. I care about Sophia too much to risk becoming a disruption in her life. And your world, the Tuesday meetings, the men with guns, the threats that need handling, that's not a world I belong in." His expression hardened slightly. "Yet here you are. For Sophia," I insisted. "Only for her?" His question hung between us, demanding honesty. I looked away first. "I should get ready. It's almost time for her breakfast." Antonio rose from the bed, gathering his scattered clothing with efficient movements. I watched him transform back into the impeccable, untouchable Mr. Salvatore, armor reassembled piece by piece. At the door, he paused. "This conversation isn't over, Charlotte." It sounded halfway between a promise and a threat. For 2 weeks, we engaged in an elaborate dance. During daylight hours, in front of Sophia and the staff, we maintained our formal employer-employee relationship. At night, he would come to my room, or summon me to his, and we would lose ourselves in each other until dawn threatened to expose our secret. I told myself it was temporary, that eventually I would come to my senses, remember who he was and what he did. But each time he touched me, each time I discovered another facet of the complex man beneath the fearsome reputation, I fell deeper into a maze I wasn't sure I wanted to escape. One evening, as we lay in his massive bed, he traced patterns on my bare shoulder, his expression thoughtful. "Sophia asked me something interesting today," he said. I turned to face him. "Oh?" "She asked if you were going to be her new mother." My breath caught. "What did you tell her?" I asked what she thought about that possibility. His eyes, usually so guarded, were open, vulnerable. "She said the blue butterfly would stay forever then." I sat up, pulling the sheet around me. "Antonio, you can't just—" "Can't what? Consider a future where you're more than just my daughter's caretaker? More than just my lover? We've barely known each other 3 months, I protested, though time seemed a weak objection compared to the fundamental differences in our worlds. "I knew after 3 days," he said simply, "the way you understood Sophia, saw her as she truly is. The way you stood up to me when everyone else cowers. That's not a basis for whatever you're suggesting. He sat up beside me, taking my face in his hands. I'm not suggesting anything yet. I'm telling you that my daughter sees what's happening between us. Because children, especially children like Sophia, notice everything, and I'm asking you to think about what you want this to be. I leaned into his touch despite myself. I want what's best for Sophia. As do I. Always. His thumb stroked my cheek. But perhaps what's best for her is also what's best for us. Before I could respond, a sharp knock came at the bedroom door. Antonio tensed, immediately on alert. No one would dare interrupt him unless it was urgent. "Sir?" Marco's voice tight with barely controlled panic. Antonio was out of bed in an instant, pulling on pants and a robe. "What is it?" "It's Miss Sophia, sir. She's missing." The world seemed to stop. Antonio froze for a heartbeat, then exploded into action, throwing open the door to find Marco standing there, ashen-faced. "What do you mean, missing?" Antonio's voice was deadly quiet. I scrambled from the bed, wrapping myself in the sheet. When was she last seen? Marco's eyes widened slightly at the sight of me in his boss's bedroom, but he recovered quickly. Mrs. Reynolds checked on her at 9 p.m. as usual. When I made the midnight security sweep, her bed was empty. Antonio was already striding down the hallway. "Lock down the property. Every inch of the grounds, every room. Find her now." I rushed back to my room, throwing on clothes haphazardly. My mind raced through possibilities. Sophia had never left her room at night before, never broken her routine. Something was terribly wrong. I ran to her bedroom, hoping against hope that she'd returned. The empty bed with its butterfly-patterned comforter sent a chill through me. I scanned the room, looking for clues, anything that might indicate where she'd gone or why. Her closet door stood ajar. Inside, I noticed her emergency backpack was missing, the one she'd meticulously packed with essentials for what she called bad days. It contained her favorite blue sweater, a small photo of her and Antonio, her special blue butterfly hair clip, and a few other comfort items. She'd left voluntarily then. But why? And where would she go? I hurried downstairs to find the house in controlled chaos. Security teams were sweeping every room, checking surveillance footage. Antonio stood in the center of his study, issuing rapid-fire commands, his face a mask of controlled terror. "Her emergency pack is gone," I said as I entered. "She took it with her." His head snapped toward me. "You're sure?" "Positive. She packed it herself, showed me where she kept it, just in case." In case of what?" he demanded. She never specified. Just bad days. I tried to think like Sophia, to see the world through her perfectly ordered lens. Has anything changed recently? Anything disrupted her routine or upset her? Antonio ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of agitation. Nothing. Everything has been exactly as she. He stopped abruptly, realization dawning on his face. Us. You and me. "But we've been so careful," I protested. "And she seemed positive about the idea when she asked you. Children say what they think adults want to hear sometimes." His voice was hollow. "Even Sophia." Marco burst into the room. "Sir, we found something on the East Wing cameras. 40 minutes ago, Miss Sophia left through the garden door." "Alone?" Antonio's voice cracked on the word. "Yes, sir. Voluntary movement, no signs of distress. She appeared to know exactly where she was going." I closed my eyes, thinking. "The willow tree," I said suddenly. "By the pond." Both men turned to me. "She talks about it sometimes, says it's where she goes in her head when things get too loud, too overwhelming. She's drawn it dozens of times." Antonio was already moving, barking orders to focus the search on the eastern grounds. I followed, grabbing a flashlight from one of the security team members. The night air was biting, winter approaching with icy fingers. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around myself, thinking with dread of Sophia in her thin pajamas, alone in the darkness she feared. Antonio moved ahead of me, his longer strides eating up the distance. Security teams fanned out across the grounds, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness like searchlights. The pond lay at the far edge of the property, surrounded by carefully manicured gardens, now eerily silent in the moonlight. The ancient willow tree stood like a sentinel at the water's edge, its sweeping branches creating a curtained sanctuary. Antonio reached it first, pushing aside the trailing branches. His sudden, sharp intake of breath told me he'd found her before I could see for myself. Sophia sat curled against the massive trunk, her knees drawn to her chest, the emergency backpack beside her. She was shivering violently, her lips tinged blue from the cold. "Sophia," Antonio breathed, relief and fear mingling in his voice. He crouched before her, careful not to touch her without permission. "Tesoro, are you hurt?" She shook her head, not looking at him. "The butterfly is confused," she whispered. I knelt beside Antonio, my heart breaking at the sight of her distress. "Sophia, we were so worried. Why did you come out here alone?" Her dark eyes, so like her father's, finally lifted to mine. "You were in Papa's room. The pattern changed." Antonio flinched as if struck. "The butterfly doesn't know where to go now," she continued, her voice small and lost. "If you're in Papa's room, where does Sophia go?" I understood then. In her ordered world, every person had their place. Her father in his room, me in mine, her in hers. Our nighttime rendezvous had disrupted the pattern she relied on to make sense of her world. "Oh, sweetheart," I said gently. "Your place is always with us, no matter where we are. You are the most important person to both of us." Antonio reached slowly toward his daughter. "May I carry you inside, Sophia? You're very cold." She hesitated, then gave a tiny nod. He gathered her into his arms with infinite tenderness, tucking her against his chest. As he stood, Sophia suddenly reached one hand toward me. "Charlotte, too," she said. "Both." I took her cold little hand in mine, and together we walked back toward the house, a fragile new pattern forming with each step. Everything changed after that night. The careful separation we'd maintained, Antonio and I, crumbled in the face of Sophia's distress. Children, particularly those on the spectrum, need honesty, consistency, and clear patterns. Our attempt at secrecy had only created confusion and fear. The morning after we found Sophia beneath the willow tree, Antonio called a family meeting. His term, not mine, though it made my heart flutter traitorously. We sat in the sunroom, morning light streaming through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny stars. "Sophia," Antonio began, his voice gentler than I'd ever heard it. "I need to explain something important about Charlotte and me." The little girl sat perfectly straight in her chair, hands folded in her lap, dark eyes moving between her father and me. I noticed she wore the blue butterfly clip in her hair, a good sign. "Charlotte is special to me," Antonio continued, "in a different way than you are special to me. You are my daughter, my heart. Nothing will ever change that." "And Charlotte?" Sophia asked, her voice small but steady. Antonio glanced at me, a question in his eyes. I nodded slightly, giving him permission to continue. "Charlotte is someone I care for very deeply, someone who makes me happy, someone who understands both of us." He leaned forward, careful to maintain the distance Sophia preferred. "Sometimes she will spend time with me in my room. Sometimes we will spend time in her room, but you will always know where we are, and you can always find us if you need us." Sophia considered this, her brilliant mind processing the new information. "Like a new pattern," she said finally. "Yes, exactly like a new pattern. One that includes all three of us." She turned to me then. "Will you still read me stories? Every night," I promised. "That won't change." "And brush my hair 20 strokes each section?" "Exactly 20, I assured her with a smile. She seemed satisfied, but then frowned slightly. "The men who come on Tuesdays, they won't hurt Charlotte?" Antonio tensed beside me. I'd never asked directly about his business, maintaining a careful separation between the man I was falling in love with and the dangerous world he inhabited. But Sophia, with her unflinching perception, had brought it into the light. "No one will ever hurt Charlotte," Antonio said, his voice dropping to that quiet register that I'd learned was more dangerous than any shout. "I would never allow it." Sophia nodded, apparently satisfied. "I'm hungry." The abrupt change of subject was so typical of her that I couldn't help but laugh, tension draining from the room. "Pancakes?" I suggested. "It's Saturday." "Butterfly shapes," she confirmed, sliding from her chair, "with the syrup separate." As she walked toward the kitchen, Antonio caught my hand, pulling me close. "Thank you," he murmured against my hair. "For what?" "For understanding her, for understanding me." His arms tightened around me, "for being willing to try this unconventional family arrangement." I pulled back slightly to look at him. "I haven't agreed to anything permanent yet." A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Yet." Life settled into a new routine. I spent most nights with Antonio, but always returned to my room before dawn to maintain the morning schedule Sophia depended on. We were careful to be transparent about our whereabouts, creating a color-coded chart that hung in Sophia's room, so she always knew where to find each of us. To my surprise, she thrived under the new arrangement. Perhaps it was the honesty, the removal of the confusing secrecy. Or perhaps it was simply having two people who loved her working together openly to create the stability she craved. One evening, about 2 weeks after our family meeting, I was helping Sophia organize her rock collection, categorized by color, size, and what she called friendship potential, when she made an announcement. "I want to call you Mama." The simple statement nearly stopped my heart. I set down the smooth quartz crystal I'd been examining and turned to face her fully. "Sophia, I'm very honored that you would think of me that way." She continued arranging stones in their velvet-lined box, not looking at me. "My real mother didn't want me. Papa said she couldn't understand my special brain." The matter-of-fact way she said it made my chest ache. "Sometimes people don't understand what they have," I said carefully. "You understand," she said, still focused on her task. "And you want to stay. The butterfly says so." I blinked back sudden tears. "The butterfly is right. I do want to stay. Then you can be my mama." She placed the final stone in its designated spot and closed the box with a satisfying click. "Papa wants you to be my mama too. He keeps the ring in his desk drawer." My breath caught. "What ring, Sophia?" She gave me a look that clearly questioned my intelligence. "The ring to ask you to marry him. In the blue box. Top right drawer, behind the picture of me." Before I could process this bombshell, delivered with such casual certainty, Antonio appeared in the doorway. He took in my shocked expression and Sophia's satisfied smile, and raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay in here?" "Sophia just told me about a ring," I said, watching his face carefully. A rare flash of genuine surprise crossed his features, followed by something like resignation. His eyes moved to his daughter. "Have you been in my desk, Sophia?" "No," she said truthfully. "Marco was looking for stamps. He found it. He told Giovanni it was pretty. I heard them." Antonio shook his head, a rueful smile playing at his lips. "Nothing stays secret in this house, it seems." My heart raced as implications cascaded through my mind. Marriage, becoming Sophia's stepmother officially, becoming Mrs. Salvatore, wife to a man whose business I still knew almost nothing about, whose power and danger I could only glimpse. "We'll talk later," Antonio said softly, correctly reading my overwhelmed expression. "Sophia, it's time for your bath." As I rose to help with her evening routine, he caught my arm gently. "Let Mrs. Reynolds handle it tonight. I think you and I need to have a conversation." 20 minutes later, we sat in his study, the same room where we'd first met, where I'd first encountered Sophia. It felt like years ago, rather than months. Antonio leaned against his desk, arms crossed over his chest, watching me with those dark, unreadable eyes. "So," he said finally, "you know about the ring. Apparently everyone knows about the ring except me," I replied, aiming for lightness despite my racing heart. He moved to the desk, opened the drawer Sophia had described, and extracted a small blue velvet box. "This wasn't how I planned to do this." "How did you plan to do it?" A ghost of a smile, with more romance, less ambush. He came to stand before me, but instead of kneeling as I half expected, he simply held out the box. "Look at it, then we'll talk." I took the box with trembling fingers and opened it. Nestled inside was a ring of such understated elegance it took my breath away, a perfect oval sapphire surrounded by a halo of smaller diamonds, set in platinum. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "It reminded me of your eyes." He took the box back, removing the ring. "I'm not asking you to wear it, not yet. But I want you to know my intentions. Antonio," he held up a hand, "let me finish. Please." He set the ring on the desk beside him. "I know what I am, Charlotte. I have no illusions about the world I inhabit or the things I've done. But I also know what I feel for you, what I feel when I see you with my daughter, when I wake up with you beside me, when you challenge me in ways no one else would dare." I remained silent, afraid that if I spoke, I would break the spell of his rare vulnerability. "I want you in my life, permanently, as Sophia's mother, as my wife. But I understand that accepting that means accepting everything, including parts of my life I've kept separate from you." There it was. The elephant in the room, the subject we'd carefully danced around for months. "The Tuesday meetings," I said softly. He nodded. "Among other things." "Tell me." His eyes searched mine. "Once I tell you, there's no going back. No plausible deniability. If you're asking me to consider spending my life with you, raising Sophia with you, I need to know exactly what that life entails." I straightened my spine, bracing myself. "No more compartmentalization, Antonio. All of you or none of you." Something like respect flashed in his eyes. He moved to the bar cart in the corner, poured 2 glasses of whiskey, and handed one to me before taking a seat across from me. "My father came to America from Sicily in the 1960s, he began, his voice taking on a cadence I hadn't heard before. More pronounced accent, more rhythm. He had nothing but the clothes on his back and connections to certain families in New York. He built an empire through those connections. Import-export businesses, construction companies, waste management, real estate. All legitimate on paper. I took a sip of whiskey, letting the burn ground me. By the time I was born, he was a wealthy man. Respected, feared. He sent me to the best schools, taught me everything he knew about business. Both kinds. Antonio's eyes never left mine. When he died, I inherited everything, including his position within the organization. "The Mafia," I said, the word feeling strange on my tongue. "We don't use that term, but yes. La Familia." He took a long swallow of whiskey. "I've worked hard to legitimize much of the business. The construction companies, the import-export, the real estate. They're clean now, profitable through legal means. But not everything. No, he admitted, some aspects remain traditional. Protection rackets, drugs, human trafficking." I forced myself to ask the worst questions, needing to know boundaries. His expression hardened. "I have lines I don't cross. No trafficking, ever. No dealing with children. The drugs. We control territory, take a percentage from those who operate within it. But we don't handle product directly." "And the protection?" "Insurance," he corrected with a slight smile. "Businesses pay. We ensure nothing unfortunate happens to them." "By threatening them yourself," I said flatly. "By protecting them from others who would do worse." He leaned forward. "It's complicated, Charlotte. The world isn't black and white. People get hurt," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes. No denial. No justification. Just honesty. People who break the rules, who threaten what's mine, who endanger the family, like James Harrington," I said, remembering the pallor of his face when Antonio mentioned that name, Venucci. James Harrington was a spoiled boy playing at being a man. He needed to learn consequences. Antonio's voice was dismissive. He was never in real danger, just strongly encouraged to reconsider his choices. I took another sip of whiskey, trying to reconcile this world with the man who read bedtime stories to his daughter, who held me with such tenderness, who noticed when I mentioned books I wanted to read. "And Sophia's mother?" I asked, the question that had burned in me for months. "What happened to her?" Antonio went very still. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Francesca was beautiful, ambitious, the daughter of an associate from the old country. His voice was carefully controlled. Our marriage was arranged, beneficial to both families. She wanted the lifestyle, the status. She didn't want a child, especially not one who required special care, who didn't fit her image of perfection. My heart ached for Sophia, for the rejection she'd experienced from the person who should have loved her most. When Sophia was diagnosed with autism, Francesca changed, became cruel. I found bruises on my daughter's arms. Antonio's eyes turned cold, distant. No one hurts my child. No one. A chill ran down my spine. What did you do? I gave her a choice. Leave, never contact us again, with a generous financial settlement, or stay and face consequences for harming Sophia. She chose to leave, I said, relieved. Yes. His answer came too quickly, his eyes too flat. Antonio, I pressed, needing the whole truth. Is she alive? The silence stretched between us, heavy with implications. As far as I know, he said finally. She's living in Milan, remarried to a fashion designer, no children. The settlement agreement includes regular confirmation of her continued health and happiness, provided she stays far away from Sophia. The calculated precision of the arrangement was both reassuring and terrifying. This was the man I'd fallen in love with, capable of both tender devotion and cold retribution. Thank you for telling me the truth, I said quietly. All of it, he confirmed. No more secrets, Charlotte. I stood, setting down my glass, and moved to the window. Outside, the garden lay dormant under winter's approach, waiting for spring's renewal. Like my own life, poised at a crossroads. I need time, I said, still facing the window, to think about all of this, about what it means for me, for my future, for my relationship with Sophia. I heard him rise, felt his presence behind me, not touching, but close enough that I could feel his warmth. Take all the time you need, he said. But know this, my feelings won't change. What I want won't change. I turned to face him. And what is that exactly? You. As my wife. As Sophia's mother. As the heart of whatever family we create together. His eyes, usually so guarded, were completely open now, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen. I love you, Charlotte. I think I have since the moment you knelt on my office floor to fix my daughter's tights. The words, so simply stated, hit me with physical force. In all our time together, through nights of passion and days of building our unconventional family unit, neither of us had said those 3 words. I love Sophia, I said carefully. That I know with absolute certainty. Pain flickered across his face at my deliberate omission. And you, I continued, reaching up to touch his cheek. You I love in ways that terrify me. Because loving you means accepting all of you. The father, the lover, and yes, the man who holds Tuesday meetings in the basement. Hope kindled in his eyes. Is that a yes? It's a not yet, I clarified. I need to be sure, Antonio. Not just for my sake, but for Sophia's. She's already called me Mama today. If I stay, if I wear your ring, there's no going back for her. I won't risk breaking her heart if I'm not absolutely certain. He nodded, accepting my terms with grace I hadn't expected. How will you know when you're certain? I smiled slightly. I imagine it will be like Sophia's blue butterfly. It will just appear when it's safe. Winter melted into spring, and still, the ring remained in its blue velvet box in Antonio's drawer. He never pressured me, never mentioned it, though I sometimes caught him watching me with Sophia, a question in his eyes I wasn't ready to answer. Sophia continued to call me Mama, a title I accepted with both joy and trepidation. We fell into the rhythm of family life. Breakfast together, Antonio joining us when he could, weekends exploring museums that accommodated Sophia's sensory needs, quiet evenings reading in the library, the 3 of us in companionable silence. The Tuesday meetings continued, but Antonio no longer disappeared behind an impenetrable wall afterward. Instead, he would find me once Sophia was asleep, sometimes with shadows in his eyes, sometimes with tension in his shoulders, and silently seek the comfort of my arms. I learned to read the signs, to know when to ask questions, and when to simply be present. I learned that there were aspects of his business I could influence, pushing for more legitimate investments, suggesting community initiatives that built goodwill while genuinely helping people. Most importantly, I learned that loving Antonio didn't mean condoning everything he did. It meant accepting the complexity of the man, recognizing the fierce protector alongside the ruthless enforcer, understanding that in his world, the two were inseparable. One perfect May morning, Sophia and I were in the garden, planting flowers in the beds outside my window, pansies and forget-me-nots in careful patterns she had designed with mathematical precision. Blue butterflies like these flowers, she informed me, patting soil around a delicate plant. Do they? How do you know? I asked, enjoying her rare, talkative mood. I researched, she said seriously. For my project. What project is that, sweetheart? Instead of answering, she reached into the pocket of her gardening apron and withdrew something small that caught the sunlight. She held it out to me with solemn ceremony. In her palm lay the sapphire ring from Antonio's desk. My breath caught. Sophia, where did you get that? Papa said it was time. She continued, holding it out, unwavering. He said the butterfly knows it's safe now. I looked up to find Antonio standing at the garden's edge, watching us with that intensity that still made my heart race after all these months. He walked toward us slowly, as if afraid of startling me. I promised I wouldn't pressure you, he said when he reached us. And I've kept that promise. But Sophia had this idea. We made a family, Sophia stated matter-of-factly, still holding out the ring. It needs to be official, for the pattern to be complete. I looked between them, this dangerous, complex man and his extraordinary daughter, both watching me with identical dark eyes filled with identical hope. In that moment, I realized the truth I'd been circling for months. Family isn't always what you expect it to be. Sometimes it's found in the most unlikely places, with the most unlikely people. Sometimes it's a little girl who sees the world through different eyes, and a man whose darkness is balanced by the fiercest capacity for love I'd ever witnessed. Yes, I said simply, holding out my hand to Sophia. With careful precision, she slipped the ring onto my finger, her face lighting up with a rare, brilliant smile. Pattern complete, she announced with satisfaction. Antonio gathered us both into his arms. The three of us together in the spring sunshine, surrounded by blue flowers awaiting their butterflies. Not complete, he murmured against my hair, just beginning. And in that moment, standing in the garden of a home that had once seemed like a gilded cage but now felt like sanctuary, I knew he was right. Our story, complicated, unconventional, sometimes dangerous, but always anchored by love, was just beginning. The blue butterfly had found its safe place, and so had I.